The last rays of October's sun painted the weathered boards of Clara Whitmore's cabin in shades of rust and gold. She stood at her porch, watching dust devils dance across the barren stretch between her home and the town of Dust Hollow, a mile distant. Even from here, she could see the church spire stabbing into the darkening sky like an accusing finger. It had been 3 years since Thomas died. 3 years since the townsfolk had started crossing the street when they saw her coming. 3 years of whispers that followed her like tumbleweeds whenever she ventured into town for supplies. Trader's widow. They called her when they thought she couldn't hear. Sometimes they didn't bother waiting. Clara pulled her shawl tighter and turned back to her meager supper, cornbread and the last of the preserved beans. The general store had raised prices again, though only for her, Mr. Henderson always had that peculiar way of doing his arithmetic when she approached his counter, his fingers dancing over the ledger like he was playing some cruel piano. The knock came just as she was clearing her plate. 3 sharp raps that made her freeze, spoon halfway to the wash basin. Nobody visited the Whitmore cabin. Nobody had since the day they'd buried Thomas in the plot behind the church, his grave marked with the smallest stone the minister could find. Mrs. Whitmore. The voice belonged to Samuel Morrison, head of the town council. "We need to speak with you." Clara's hands trembled as she unlatched the door. Morrison stood there with 5 other men, their faces set in the grim lines of people doing unpleasant duty. She recognized Jacob Mills, the blacksmith, and Dr. Hartley. The others were shadows in the gathering dusk. "What is this about?" she asked, though her heart already knew. "There's been sickness," Morrison said. "The Watson children, the Hendricks boy. They've taken ill from the well water." "I'm sorry to hear that," Clara said carefully. "But I don't see—" "You were seen near the well last Tuesday." This from Mills. His thick arms crossed over his leather apron. Middle of the night. Clara's mind raced. She had been to the well. Yes, but in the early evening. Same as always. The town well was the only source of clean water for miles, and they couldn't deny her that, not officially. "I drew water at dusk, as I'm permitted," she said. "There were others there. Mrs. Patterson saw me leave." "Mrs. Patterson says different now," Morrison replied. "Says she might have been mistaken about the time." The accusation hung between them like a noose already knotted. Clara felt the familiar tightness in her chest, the same suffocating pressure that had been her companion since Thomas was accused of selling ammunition to the Apache. They'd never proved it. But in Dust Hollow, proof was a luxury reserved for the respectable folk. "I didn't poison anyone," Clara said, her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. "Why would I harm children? Why would your husband sell bullets to savages?" Mills spat. "Bad blood runs in this household." "Doctor," Hartley stepped forward, his medical bag clutched in his pale hands. "We need to search your property. Mrs. Whitmore, if you have nothing to hide, search away." Clara interrupted, stepping aside. She knew resistance would only confirm their suspicions. "You'll find nothing but a widow's poor provisions." They ransacked her cabin with the efficiency of men who'd already decided what they'd find. When Mills emerged from her root cellar carrying a small bottle of laudanum, the remnants of what Dr. Hartley himself had prescribed for her grief 3 years ago, the verdict was written on every face. "Medicine," Morrison pronounced, as if the word itself was evidence. "Enough to sicken half the town if used wrong. That's laudanum," Clara protested. "Doctor Hartley, you gave it to me yourself when Thomas—" "I gave it to a grieving widow," the doctor interrupted, not meeting her eyes. "Not to a woman who'd use it for vengeance." The word vengeance rippled through the group. Clara saw hands move to pistol grips, saw the fear and anger twisting familiar faces into masks of judgment. "You have until sunrise," Morrison said finally. "Pack what you can carry and leave Dust Hollow. If you're seen in town after dawn, we won't be responsible for what happens." They left her standing in her violated home, broken crockery and scattered belongings testament to their search. Clara sank into her chair. staring at the mess. 28 years she'd lived in this valley. She'd been born in the back room of this very cabin, had married Thomas in the church where they now wouldn't let her worship. As midnight approached, Clara packed mechanically. 2 dresses, her mother's Bible, the daguerreotype of Thomas from their wedding day. The coins hidden beneath the loose floorboard. Not much, but enough perhaps to start again somewhere. Where? She didn't know. The frontier was vast but unforgiving to a woman alone. She was tying the last bundle when she heard it, a sound so faint it might have been wind through the canyon, but wind didn't sob. Clara took the lantern and stepped into the cold October night. The sound came again, from the direction of the woods that bordered her property. She hesitated. Every instinct screamed at her to go back inside, to bar the door and wait for dawn, but the sob came once more, weaker now, and unmistakably the cry of a child. She found him beneath a fallen pine, half hidden by branches and shadows. An Apache boy, no more than 2 years old, his buckskin clothing torn and bloody, his dark eyes, glazed with fever, fixed on her face without fear or recognition. Clara's breath caught. She knew she should walk away. Harboring an Apache child would transform her from mere outcast to active enemy. They'd hang her for certain, and probably burn her cabin for good measure. The child whimpered, one small hand reaching toward her lantern's warmth. Clara closed her eyes, seeing another path, the safe path. Leave the child, pack her things, disappear into the vast territories where nobody knew the name Whitmore. Start fresh, stay alive. When she opened her eyes, the boy was still watching her, his breathing shallow and labored. Blood seeped from a gash on his leg. He wouldn't last the night without help. God forgive me, Clara whispered, setting down the lantern. She gathered the child in her arms, shocked at how light he was, how hot his skin burned against her neck. God forgive us both. She carried him to her cabin. Her exile suddenly transformed into something else. A chance, perhaps, for a different kind of redemption than Dust Hollow would ever offer. As she cleaned his wounds by candlelight, the boy's eyes never left her face, as if he recognized something in her that she'd forgotten existed. By the time the first pink fingers of dawn stretched across the desert, Clara Whitmore had made her choice. She would take the child and disappear into the wilderness. Let Dust Hollow think what they would. She'd been condemned for crimes she didn't commit. At least now she'd be guilty of something worthwhile, saving an innocent life. As she wrapped the sleeping boy in her warmest blanket and prepared for the journey ahead, Clara allowed herself one last look at the town in the distance. Smoke rose from chimneys of homes where she'd never again be welcome. The church bell began its morning call, summoning the faithful to prayers she'd never again share. Let them come, she murmured, settling the child more securely in her arms. We'll be long gone, little one, long gone. She turned her back on Dust Hollow and walked into the wilderness, toward the mountains that promised nothing but hardship and isolation. It was, she reflected, the first free choice she'd made in 3 years. Whatever came next, she would face it on her own terms, with this unexpected soul depending on her strength. The sun climbed higher, warming her face as she picked her way along the deer trail. Behind her, the town that had been her whole world shrank to nothing. Ahead lay the unknown, vast and terrifying and suddenly, impossibly, touched with hope. The smoke from Fort Buchanan still clung to Taza Redhawk's clothes as he pressed himself against the canyon wall, listening for pursuit. 3 days had passed since the raid. 3 days of running through terrain that would break most men, but Taza was not most men. He was Apache, son of the mountains, and these rocks and thorns were his brothers. Blood seeped through the makeshift bandage on his shoulder where a cavalry bullet had found its mark. The wound burned like fire, but it was nothing compared to the ache in his chest when he thought of what he'd left behind. His son, little Ayana's boy, barely 2 winters old, hidden in the sacred cave where Taza's grandfather once sought visions. The child would be safe there for a day, perhaps 2. The cave held fresh water and Taza had left what little food he could spare, wrapped in doeskin. Just one night, he'd whispered to the boy. pressing his lips to the child's forehead. "Father will return with the sunrise." But sunrise had come and gone 3 times now. The cavalry patrols were everywhere, their blue coats spreading across the desert like a plague. Captain Morrison, brother to that town councilman, had sworn to hang every Apache who'd taken part in the raid. They'd already caught Red Sky and 2 wolves. Taza had heard their death songs carried on the wind. He moved only at night now, circling back toward the sacred cave through routes no white soldier would know. His shoulders screamed with each movement, and fever made the stars dance like fireflies. But he had to reach his son. The boy was all that remained of Ayanna, whose laughter once filled their wickiup like spring rain. Ayanna, even now, 6 months after her death. Taza could not think of her without rage blackening his vision. She'd gone to the fort to trade baskets for medicine when the sickness came to their band. The soldiers had kept her for questioning, they said, when they finally released her body. She bore marks no woman should carry, especially one heavy with child. The baby had lived just long enough for Taza to see his father's eyes in that tiny face. Then he too was gone, following his mother to the spirit world, leaving Taza with only his firstborn and a hatred that burned hotter than the desert sun. On the 4th night, Taza finally reached the approaches to the sacred cave. He'd been forced to kill his horse when its whinnying might have given him away, and the last mile on foot had nearly finished him. His shoulder had gone numb, which worried him more than the pain. The smell told him infection had set in. He pulled himself up the hidden path, each handhold a victory against his failing body. The cave mouth appeared like a black eye in the cliff face, and Taza's heart lifted. Soon he would hold his son again. They would flee deeper into the mountains, perhaps join Black Elk's band in the high country where soldiers feared to venture. "Little warrior," he called softly in Apache as he entered the cave. "Father has returned." Silence greeted him, the kind of silence that has weight, that presses against the ears like water. Taza stumbled forward, his eyes adjusting to the darkness. The blanket was there, crumpled in the corner. The water gourd sat empty. But the child— no! The word tore from his throat as he searched frantically, his hands finding nothing but cold stone. The boy was gone. No sign of struggle, no blood, just absence. Taza sank to his knees, his warrior's strength finally breaking. Had the child wandered off? Been taken by animals? The cave bear had been killed years ago, but there were still mountain cats. Wolves. Then he saw it. A small print in the dust near the entrance, barely visible. A boot print, too small for a soldier's foot. Someone had been here. Someone had taken his son. Rage gave Taza new strength. He examined the ground outside the cave with eyes trained from childhood to read the earth stories. More prints, leading down the treacherous path. A woman's boots. From the size and gait, she'd carried something heavy. His son's weight would account for the deeper impressions. White woman. The boots were store-bought, not moccasins. But what was a white woman doing so far from settlement? And why take an Apache child? Taza followed the trail through the night and into the next day, fighting his body's demands for rest. The woman had made no effort to hide her tracks. Either she was foolish or unconcerned about being followed. The trail led not toward Fort Buchanan or any of the settlements Taza knew, but deeper into the wilderness, toward the forgotten valleys where only outlaws and madmen dwelt. By sunset, he could go no further. The infection had spread, painting red streaks up his arm like war paint. He collapsed beneath a mesquite tree, shivering despite the heat. In his delirium, Ayanna came to him, her face unmarked, her belly round with promise. "Find him," she whispered with lips that moved like wind through leaves. "Our son needs you." When consciousness returned, stars wheeled overhead in their eternal dance. Taza forced himself to drink from his water pouch, to chew the last of his pemmican. Tomorrow he would find the woman who had taken his child. He would reclaim what was his. And if she had harmed the boy— He touched the knife at his belt, its handle worn smooth by his father's hand and his father's father before that. Justice would be served. Apache justice, swift and final. But when he found them the next evening, justice became a more complex thing. The woman knelt by a small fire, her back to him, auburn hair escaping from a travel-worn bonnet. She was singing something low and sweet, a lullaby that made Taza's chest tighten with memory. In her arms, wrapped in a colorful blanket, was his son, alive, fed, clean. The boy's eyes were bright with fever but alert, watching the woman's face with the same intensity he'd once reserved for his mother. As Taza watched from the shadows, frozen by a mixture of relief and confusion, the woman dipped a cloth in water and gently bathed the child's forehead. "There now, little one," she murmured in English. "The fever's breaking. You'll be running around causing mischief before we know it." She'd tended his wounded leg. Taza could see the neat bandage, far better than the rough binding he'd managed. A pot of what smelled like rabbit stew bubbled over the fire. His son's buckskins had been mended with careful stitches. This was not what Taza had expected. White women did not save Apache children. They screamed for soldiers to come shoot them. Yet here sat this stranger, cradling his son like her own, spending precious supplies on an enemy's child. The boy whimpered, and the woman began to rock him, humming a melody Taza didn't recognize. Then, astonishingly, she switched to Apache words. A simple water song his own mother had sung, the pronunciation clumsy but the melody true. "Tuyazi, Tuyazi," she sang softly. Little water, flow down from the mountain." His son's eyes drooped, comforted by the familiar sounds. The woman continued to rock him, unaware of the warrior watching from the darkness, knife half drawn, certainty crumbling like sandstone in rain. Who was this woman? Why had she saved his child? And what was Taza supposed to do now that his clear path of vengeance had twisted into something he didn't understand? The fever took him again before he could decide, dropping him to his knees with a sound that made the woman's head snap up, her eyes searching the darkness with sudden fear. "Who's there?" she called, clutching the child closer. Taza tried to answer, tried to rise, but his body had finally reached its limits. He fell forward into the firelight, his last coherent thought a prayer to the spirits that this strange white woman would show him the same mercy she'd shown his son. The knife slipped from his fingers as darkness claimed him, and somewhere in that darkness, he thought he heard Ayanna laughing, not with mockery, but with something that sounded almost like hope. Clara's heart hammered as she stared at the Apache warrior collapsed at the edge of her firelight. His face, painted with fever and dirt, bore the unmistakable features that matched the child in her arms. The same strong jaw, the same pronounced cheekbones. This was the boy's father. She knew it with sudden, absolute certainty. Her first instinct was to run. Every story she'd heard about Apache warriors flooded back, tales of scalping, torture, merciless raids on innocent homesteads. But the child in her arms whimpered and pressed closer to her chest, and she remained frozen, caught between terror and an unexpected surge of pity. The man wasn't moving. Blood had soaked through his shirt at the shoulder, and his breathing came in short, labored gasps. He was dying. Clara gently laid the sleeping child on her bedroll and approached the warrior with trembling steps. His knife lay just beyond his outstretched fingers. She kicked it away, then knelt beside him, fighting every instinct that screamed at her to flee. Up close, she could see he was younger than she'd first thought, perhaps 30 winters, though the hard life of his people might have aged him beyond his years. The wound in his shoulder was badly infected, red streaks spidering across his chest like angry lightning. "Apache," she whispered, not knowing if he could hear. "I have your son. He's safe." The warrior's eyes fluttered open, dark and unfocused. He tried to speak, but only a rattling cough emerged. His hand moved weakly toward where the child lay sleeping. Clara made her decision. She couldn't leave him to die, not when his son slept peacefully just feet away. Whatever he was, whatever he'd done, he was a father who'd somehow tracked them through miles of wilderness while wounded and fevered. Working quickly, she dragged him closer to the fire. Lord, but he was heavy, all muscle and sinew despite his illness. She cut away his shirt with her sewing scissors, gasping at the infected bullet wound. It needed to be cleaned and drained. tasks that would have challenged her even with proper supplies. The warrior groaned as she worked, slipping in and out of consciousness. Sometimes he spoke in Apache, rapid words she couldn't understand. Once, he grabbed her wrist with surprising strength, his eyes focusing on her face with burning intensity. "Boy," he said in accented English. "My boy." "He's here," Clara assured him, gesturing to the sleeping child. "Safe. I promise you, he's safe." The grip on her wrist loosened, and something like relief crossed his features before the fever took him again. Clara worked through the night, using skills half-remembered from helping her mother tend wounded men after Indian raids back in Missouri. She boiled water, tore strips from her spare petticoat for bandages, and used her last precious bit of whiskey to clean the wound. When the warrior thrashed in delirium, she held him down, whispering soothing nonsense as she'd done for the child. Dawn came slowly, painting the desert in shades of rose and gold. The warrior's fever had broken, though he remained unconscious. The child woke and crawled immediately to his father's side, patting the man's face with chubby hands and babbling in a mixture of Apache and the few English words Clara had taught him. "Papa," the boy said clearly, and Clara's heart clenched. She'd been calling herself foolish for saving one Apache life. Now she'd saved two, and complicated her exile beyond measure. The warrior woke at midday, his eyes sharp despite the ordeal. He tried to sit up, reaching for weapons that weren't there, then froze as he took in the scene, his son playing with pine cones near the fire, Clara stirring a pot of broth, his shoulder cleanly bandaged. "You saved him," he said, his English better than she'd expected. "He was dying." Clara replied simply, "A child alone in a cave, what else could I do? White women do not save Apache children, and Apache warriors don't usually collapse at white women's campfires," she countered, surprised by her own boldness. Almost a smile touched his lips. "This is true." He studied her with those penetrating eyes. "You are not from the settlements. Your clothes, your face, you run from something." Clara stiffened. "That's my business, as my son is mine." He tried to sit up again, grimacing. "I will take him and go. You won't make it a mile in your condition." Clara ladled broth into a cup. "The infection nearly killed you. Move too soon and it will finish the job." He watched suspiciously as she approached with the broth. "Why do you help us?" Clara considered the question. Why indeed? Maybe because I know what it is to be condemned for things beyond my control. Maybe because your son looked at me with eyes that held no judgment, only need. She held out the cup. Or maybe because I'm a fool who can't tell the difference between kindness and stupidity anymore. The warrior, Taza, he told her his name was, took the broth and drank slowly. His son toddled over and climbed into his lap, chattering happily. The fierce warrior's face softened as he held the boy, murmuring to him in Apache. "His mother?" Clara asked gently. The softness vanished, replaced by something hard and painful. "Dead. Soldiers at the fort. They—" He stopped, jaw clenching. "She went to trade. They kept her for questioning. When she came back—" He didn't finish, but Clara understood. She'd heard enough whispered stories about what happened to Indian women in custody. "I'm sorry," she said, meaning it. Taza looked at her sharply, as if surprised by genuine sympathy from a white woman. "Your people would say she deserved it. Enemy, savage. My people say a lot of things," Clara replied. "They said my husband was a traitor for trading fairly with Apaches. They said I poisoned children I've known since birth. My people drove me into the wilderness to die." She met his gaze steadily. "So forgive me if I don't much care what they would say." They spent 3 days in uneasy alliance, Clara nursing Taza back to strength while he watched her every movement with suspicious eyes. Yet, gradually, the suspicion faded. He saw how she cared for his son, how the boy reached for her as readily as for him. He noticed the careful way she rationed their food, giving the child the largest portions. On the 3rd night, as they sat by the fire with the boy sleeping between them, Taza spoke. "I must take him to my people. Black Elk's band in the northern mountains. He will be safe there. Clara nodded, though the thought of losing the child she'd come to love made her chest tight. Of course. The journey is hard, 5 days through rough country. He paused, staring into the flames. You cannot return to your town. No. Where will you go? Clara laughed bitterly. I haven't the faintest idea. California, perhaps somewhere I can start over, where nobody knows my name. Alone? A white woman in the wilderness? He shook his head. You will die. Then I'll die free, she said with more bravery than she felt. Taza was quiet for a long moment. Then, you could come with us. Clara's breath caught. To an Apache camp. They'd kill me on sight. Not if you're under my protection. Not if... He seemed to struggle with the words. The boy needs tending. The fever damaged his body. He limps now. You've seen. Our medicine woman is old, half blind. You know healing. I've watched you. You could help him. It was an impossible suggestion. A white woman living among Apaches? Yet what alternative did she have? The settlements would reject or hang her. The wilderness would kill her, at least with Taza's band. She might survive. They would never accept me, she said. They would accept what helps the children. Taza countered. We have lost many to white man's diseases. A healer who knows both medicines. He trailed off, but she heard the hope beneath the practicality. Clara looked at the sleeping boy, his hand clutching both her skirt and his father's legging, binding them together in innocent trust. She thought of the empty trail ahead, the loneliness of exile, the certain death that awaited a woman alone. Until the boy is well, she heard herself say, I'll come until he no longer needs my care. Then I'll go my own way. Taza nodded slowly. Until he is well, he agreed, though something in his eyes suggested he knew, as she did, that such bonds once forged were not easily broken. In the morning, they would start the journey north, into the heart of Apache territory. Clara Whitmore, condemned by her own people, would walk among their enemies under the protection of a warrior whose very name meant death to settlers. She should have been terrified. Instead, as she watched Taza point out constellations to his son, teaching him the star stories of their people, she felt something she hadn't experienced since Thomas died. Purpose, perhaps even hope. The fire burned low, and somewhere in the distance, a wolf howled its lonely song to the desert moon. But here, in this small circle of light, 3 souls sat together, Apache warrior, white woman, and mixed-blood child, bound by circumstance and need into something that might, impossibly, become family. The narrow canyon squeezed them like a fist. Clara pressed herself against the rock wall, trying to make herself smaller as Taza scouted ahead. The boy, she'd started calling him Samuel in her mind, though Taza used his Apache name, clung to her neck, his breathing hot against her collar. They'd been traveling for 2 days, keeping to paths that seemed more suited to mountain goats than humans. Taza's shoulder was healing, but he still moved stiffly, and Clara could see the pain he tried to hide. Soldiers, Taza whispered, sliding back to where they huddled. A patrol on the rim. We wait. They crouched in the shadows for what felt like hours, the sun beating down between the canyon walls. Clara's legs cramped, but she didn't dare move. The boy grew restless, whimpering softly, and she bounced him gently, humming under her breath to keep him quiet. When they finally moved again, twilight was falling. The path ahead looked treacherous in the dying light, a ledge no wider than her foot, with a drop into darkness on one side. I can't, Clara breathed, vertigo making her head spin. You must. Taza's voice was steady, patient. I will go first with the boy. Watch where I step. No. The word came out sharper than intended. If you fall with him. Something shifted in Taza's expression. You care for him as your own. It wasn't a question, but Clara nodded anyway. These past days, the child had wrapped himself around her heart with his quick smile and trusting eyes. Then you will not let fear stop you from following, Taza said simply. He strapped the boy to his back despite his wounded shoulder, and Clara watched, heart in throat. as they navigated the ledge. The child laughed, thinking it a game, unaware of the danger. Her turn. Clara pressed her back to the cliff face, inching along, trying not to look down. Halfway across, her boots slipped on loose shale. She heard herself scream as she pitched sideways, certain she was falling. Strong hands caught her, pulled her against solid warmth. Taza had lunged back onto the ledge, catching her despite the weight of his son on his back. For a moment they stood pressed together, her face buried in his chest, his arms encircling both her and the child. "Breathe," he commanded softly. "Look at me, not the drop." Clara raised her eyes to his. In the fading light, she could see flecks of gold in the dark brown, could see the concern that softened the warrior's harsh features. "I have you," he said. "Step where I step." He kept one hand on her arm as they finished crossing, and Clara found that his touch steadied her more than the physical support. When they reached the other side, her legs gave out, and she sank to the ground, shaking. "You did well," Taza said, and the approval in his voice warmed her more than it should have. They made camp in a sheltered grove, the sound of running water nearby. As Clara prepared their meager meal, dried meat and wild roots Taza had shown her were safe, she noticed him favoring his shoulder more than usual. "You've torn it open again," she said. It wasn't a question. "It will heal. Not if you keep reopening it doing foolish things." She gestured for him to sit. "Let me look." He submitted to her ministrations with the same stoic patience his son showed. Though she caught the occasional flinch, the wound had indeed reopened, though not badly. As she worked, she was acutely aware of his nearness, of the heat radiating from his skin, of the way his breath caught when her fingers brushed a sensitive spot. "There," she said, tying off the fresh bandage. "Try not to catch any more falling women for a day or two." "I make no promises," he said. And there, was that actually humor in his voice? That night, as they shared the warmth of their single fire, the temperature dropped unexpectedly. Clara shivered in her thin dress, trying to edge closer to the flames without seeming obvious. The boy slept between them, wrapped in the warmest blanket. She woke some time later to find additional weight across her shoulders. Taza's coat, still warm from his body, had been draped over her. He sat on the other side of the fire, keeping watch in just his shirt despite the cold. "You'll freeze," she protested. "I have known colder nights." He didn't look at her, his eyes scanning the darkness beyond their camp. "Sleep. Tomorrow will be harder." Instead of sleeping, Clara found herself studying him in the firelight, the sharp planes of his face, the old scar across his jaw, the way he held himself always ready for danger even in rest. He was handsome, she realized with a start. Not in the soft way of town men, but in something wild and elemental. "It is strange," Taza said suddenly, still not looking at her. "To trust a white woman with my son's life. My people will not understand, nor would mine understand why I chose to save him." Clara admitted, "Perhaps that makes us both fools. Perhaps." He was quiet for a moment. "Or perhaps the spirits laugh at the boundaries men draw. My grandmother used to say that blood and skin mean nothing to the mountain. It judges only the heart. And how does the mountain judge our hearts?" Now he did look at her, his gaze intense across the flames. "I think it has already decided, or we would not be here." Clara felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the fire. She pulled his coat tighter around her shoulders, breathing in the scent of leather and sage and something uniquely him. The next day brought the hardest climb yet. They had to traverse a series of switchbacks up a cliff face, and Clara's fear of heights returned with vengeance. Halfway up, clinging to the rock with bleeding fingers, she froze completely. "I can't," she gasped. "I can't move." Taza, carrying the boy, was above her on the trail. He said something to his son in Apache, then carefully made his way back down to her. "Clara." Her name on his lips surprised her. He'd never used it before. "Look at me." She forced her eyes open, found his face inches from hers. "You saved my son," he said quietly. "You saved me. You are stronger than this fear." "I'm not strong," she whispered. I'm terrified. The two are not enemies. Courage is fear that continues forward. He took her hand, his calloused palm warm against hers. One step, that's all. One step, and I am here. Step by agonizing step. He coaxed her up the cliff. When they finally reached the top, Clara collapsed, tears streaming down her face, tears of relief, of exhaustion, of something else she couldn't name. That night, they sheltered in a cave Taza knew, protected from the wind that howled outside. The boy had developed a slight fever, nothing serious, but enough to make him fretful. Clara held him, singing the water song Taza had taught her, while his father prepared an herbal tea. You learn quickly, Taza observed, watching her handle his son with practiced ease. He's a good teacher, Clara said, smiling down at the boy. Shows me what he needs, as his mother did. The words were soft, heavy with memory. Clara looked up to find Taza watching them both with an expression she couldn't read. Tell me about her? He was quiet so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then she laughed like water over stones, always laughing, even when times were hard. She would have liked you, I think, would have said the spirit sent you to teach me something. What would I teach a warrior? That not all whites wish us dead, that kindness can exist between enemies. He paused. That my heart did not die with her, as I believed. The words hung in the air between them, heavy with meaning. Clara's breath caught, her arms tightening unconsciously around the child. Taza, sleep, he said, turning away. Tomorrow we reach the final pass. But sleep eluded Clara for a long time. She lay curled around the boy, Taza's coat still wrapped around her shoulders, listening to the wind and thinking about boundaries drawn by men, about hearts judged by mountains, about the way her name sounded in his accent, like a prayer, like a promise, like something that might grow into more if they let it. When she finally drifted off, she dreamed of water laughing over stones and strong hands pulling her back from the edge. And somewhere in the dream, she wasn't afraid of falling anymore. The hidden valley spread before them like a secret Eden, green with spring grass and dotted with wildflowers Clara had never seen before. A stream wound through the center, its banks lined with cottonwoods whose leaves whispered in the warm breeze. After days of harsh travel, it seemed almost unreal. We rest here, Taza announced, setting down their meager supplies. 2 days, then the final climb to Black Elk's camp. Clara wanted to protest. Surely they should push on. But one look at the boy changed her mind. Little Samuel's fever had broken, but he remained weak, clinging to her with less than his usual energy. This peaceful valley would do them all good. They made camp near the stream, and for the first time since leaving her cabin, Clara felt she could truly breathe. While Taza hunted, she washed their clothes, taught Samuel to splash in the shallows, gathered edible plants she now recognized thanks to Taza's patient teaching. That evening, as they shared fresh rabbit and wild onions, Clara noticed Taza had brought back more than meat, purple and yellow flowers, the kind that grew high on the cliff faces, lay beside her place by the fire. For your hair, he said gruffly, not meeting her eyes. The boy picked them, but Clara had seen the scratches on his hands from climbing, knew the boy had been with her all day. She tucked one purple bloom behind her ear, felt her cheeks warm at Taza's quick, appreciative glance. Thank you, she said softly. They're beautiful. After Samuel fell asleep, they sat by the fire in comfortable silence. The days of travel had worn away the sharp edges of mistrust, leaving something softer, warmer. Clara found herself stealing glances at Taza, at the way firelight played across his features, at his gentle hands checking his son's breathing. You never speak of him, Taza said suddenly. Your husband. Clara stiffened slightly. Thomas was a good man, kind. He believed in treating all people fairly, Apache included. It cost him everything. You loved him. I did. She paused, surprised by her next words. But it was a quiet love, safe, the kind proper women are supposed to want. She laughed softly, bitterly. Look where Proper got me. And now, she looked up to find Taza watching her intently. Now I don't know what I want. Everything I was taught to value seems like smoke. The only real thing is... She gestured helplessly at the sleeping child. At the fire. At him. This, he finished. Yes. They were sitting closer than Clara had realized. Close enough that she could see the pulse beating in his throat. Could smell the wild sage scent of him. Her heart began to race, and she knew she should move away. Knew this was dangerous territory. Instead, she stayed perfectly still as Taza reached out, his fingers ghosting over the flower in her hair. Purple suits you, he murmured, like the desert lupine, beautiful but strong enough to bloom in hard ground. Clara's breath caught. Taza. I know, he said, his hand dropping. I know all the reasons this cannot be. My people, your people, the war between us, I know. But, she whispered, but when I see you with my son, when I watch you face your fears on the cliffs, when you look at me without hatred or disgust. He turned away. I forget to remember why I should not feel this. Clara's hand moved without her permission, reaching out to touch his face, to turn him back toward her. His skin was warm beneath her palm, and when their eyes met, the longing there took her breath away. The kiss, when it came, was inevitable as sunrise. Soft at first, tentative, as if they both might flee at any moment. Then Taza's arms came around her, and Clara melted against him. All thoughts of propriety burned away by the fire building between them. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard. Clara's hands were tangled in his hair, and his were splayed across her back, holding her close. This changes things, she managed. Yes, his forehead rested against hers. Clara, I cannot ask you to. Then don't ask. She pulled back to look at him. Just let this be what it is. Here, now. Tomorrow has enough troubles. They came together again, hungrier this time. Months of loss and loneliness pouring into their embrace. Clara had never felt anything like this wild wanting, this sense of coming home to a place she'd never been. Thomas had been gentle, proper, predictable. Taza was flame and storm and shelter all at once. When he laid her back on the blanket, his eyes asked a question hers had already answered. Under the star-drunk sky, beside the singing stream, they came together with a passion that acknowledged no boundaries of race or culture. Clara discovered desire could be tender and fierce at once, that pleasure could heal as much as wound, that two broken people might make something whole between them. Afterward, they lay entwined, Taza's coat covering them both. Clara traced the scars on his chest, this one from a cavalry saber, that from a hunting accident in his youth. He told her the stories, and she told him hers. The childhood in Missouri, the proper courtship with Thomas, the slow strangling of her spirit in Dust Hollow. I was dead before they exiled me. She admitted, just going through motions. Then I found Samuel, found you, and... She struggled for words. It's like I can finally breathe. Taza's arms tightened around her. Among my people, there's a word, Guyen. It means wise woman. But more, a woman who sees beyond the visible, who bridges worlds. He kissed her forehead. You are Guyen. Clara, you brought my son back from the spirit trail. You brought me back too. They made love again as dawn approached. Slower this time, memorizing each touch. Both knew this might be their only time. Black Elk's band might reject her, might demand Taza cast her out. But here in this hidden valley, for these precious hours, they belonged to each other completely. Samuel woke with the sun, chattering happily at finding both his protectors so close. The spell broke gently, replaced by the familiar rhythms of morning, breaking fast, tending the fire, preparing for another day's journey. But everything had changed. Every glance held heat now. Every accidental touch sent sparks through Clara's body. When Taza lifted her onto a boulder to help her across the stream, his hands lingered on her waist, and she saw her own want reflected in his eyes. No regrets, he asked quietly while Samuel played in the shallows. None, Clara said firmly. Then, more honestly, only that we have so little time. Time is nothing to the mountain, Taza reminded her. What is meant to endure will endure. That afternoon, teaching her to weave grass into rope, his hands covered hers to guide the motion. Such a simple thing, but Clara's concentration scattered at his touch. When she looked up, she found him smiling, a real smile that transformed his warrior's face into something boyish and warm. You're a poor student today, he teased. I have a distracting teacher, she shot back, then blushed at her boldness. His expression grew serious. Clara, when we reach my people, I know, you'll need to be their war chief, not a man who beds white women. I understand. No? He caught her hands. You don't? I mean to claim you before them, as my woman, mother to my son, if you'll have me. Clara's heart stopped. They'll never accept it. Some won't, but Black Elk is wise. He'll see what I see, that you belong with us. With me. He touched her face gently. I offer you no easy path. Life among the Apache is hard, uncertain. We are hunted, hated, but I offer you truth. No hiding, no shame, only this. He gestured to the valley, to Samuel playing, to the connection that hummed between them like a living thing. Clara thought of Dust Hollow, of respectability that masked cruelty, of safety that was really a slow death. Then she looked at this man who'd shown her heights she hadn't known existed, on cliffs, in passion, in courage. Yes, she said simply. That night, their last in the valley, Taza taught her Apache words for love, for forever, for home. She repeated them against his skin, tasted them on his lips, felt them settle into her bones like promises. When morning came, bringing with it the final climb to Taza's people, Clara faced it without fear. Whatever waited above, acceptance or rejection, peace or more flight, she would meet it as Taza's woman, Samuel's mother, her own true self at last. The flower he'd picked for her, now dried, but still colorful, rode in her hair like a declaration. And when he took her hand to help her onto the trail, she didn't let go. The smoke rose from the valley below like accusing fingers pointing at the dawn sky. Clara stood frozen at the edge of the cliff, watching their small camp burn. The shelter Taza had built with such care, the stone circle where they'd shared their fire, the lean-to where they'd stored their few possessions, all of it consumed by flames that could only mean one thing. They'd been found. Get back, Taza commanded, pulling her away from the edge. His warrior's instincts had already assessed the danger, boot prints everywhere, at least a dozen men, maybe more. The tracks led up the trail they'd planned to take to Black Elk's camp. Samuel whimpered in Clara's arms. Sensing the adult's fear, she held him tighter, her mind racing. They'd left camp at first light to gather water from the upper springs. That simple errand had saved their lives. My people? Clara asked, though she already knew. No Apache would burn a shelter that way. This was white man's destruction, thorough and vindictive. The tracks say soldiers and civilians both, Taza confirmed, reading the ground with practiced eyes. They came at night, when they found the camp empty. He gestured at the smoke. Morrison. Clara breathed. Samuel Morrison from Dust Hollow. He must have organized a posse. Taza's face hardened. The captain's brother. He swore vengeance for the fort raid. His eyes met hers. They track us still. These prints are fresh. As if summoned by his words, voices carried up from below, harsh male laughter, dogs barking. Clara's blood turned to ice. Dogs. They'd be found within the hour. Can we reach your people? She asked. Not by the main trail. They'll be watching it. Taza scanned the terrain with desperate eyes. There's another way. Dangerous. Through the devil's backbone. Clara had heard that name whispered among traders, a ridge so narrow and treacherous that even Apache avoided it. But the alternative was capture, and she knew what that meant. For Taza, a noose. For Samuel, an orphanage at best. For her, lead the way, she said. They climbed hard and fast, the sounds of pursuit growing closer. The dogs had found their scent. Men's voices echoed off canyon walls, full of bloodlust and righteousness. Clara heard her name called with words that made her skin crawl. "There! Up there!" A rifle cracked. Rock exploded near Taza's head. He threw himself over Clara and Samuel as more shots followed, the whine of bullets filling the air. "Run!" he shouted, drawing his knife, his only weapon against their guns. "The ridge! Go!" Clara ran, stumbling over loose rock, Samuel bouncing against her chest. Behind them, Taza moved like a ghost, using boulders and scrub for cover, making their pursuers cautious. Another rifle shot. A cry of pain, but not Taza's voice. He'd found a target. The devil's backbone rose before them like a granite knife edge, barely 3 feet wide in places with sheer drops on both sides. Clara's fear of heights screamed at her to stop, but the baying of dogs drove her forward. "Don't look down," she told herself, fixing her eyes on the path. 1 foot, then another. Wind tore at her skirts. Samuel buried his face in her neck, trembling. Behind them, Taza had reached the ridge's beginning, backing onto it while facing their pursuers. "That's far enough, savage!" Morrison's voice, full of authority. "Hand over the woman and child, and I might let you die quick." "The woman is mine," Taza called back. "The child is mine. Come take them if you can." Clara reached a slightly wider spot and dared to look back. At least 15 men clustered at the ridge's base, but none seemed eager to follow onto the narrow spine. Morrison himself, red-faced and sweating, pushed to the front. "Mrs. Whitmore!" he shouted. "Clara, come back now and all is forgiven. You've been bewitched by this heathen, led astray. We'll take you home, care for you proper." "Like you cared for my husband," Clara shouted back. "Like you cared when you drove me out to die. You were sick in mind, woman. Hiding that savage brat proves it. But we're Christian folk. We'll help you get right again. The sisters at the mission will take the half-breed, raise him proper." Never. Clara would throw herself off the ridge before letting them take Samuel. She pressed on, each step a victory against gravity and fear. Behind her, she heard Taza speaking in Apache, not to their pursuers, but to the mountains themselves. A prayer? A war song? The words rose and fell like wind through stone. Then chaos erupted. One of the younger men, braver or more foolish than the rest, had stepped onto the ridge. Taza met him with fury, their struggle desperate on the narrow space. The crack of a pistol. A scream. A body falling, bouncing off rock into the void. "Get him!" Morrison roared. $100 bonus to the man who brings me a scalp." But the ridge had become a bottleneck. Only one man at a time could advance, and Taza held the advantage of higher ground. He fought with savage grace, his knife against their numbers, using their fear of falling against them. Clara forced herself to keep moving, though every maternal instinct screamed at her to go back, to help him. Samuel needed her. Taza was buying them time with his blood. The ridge widened ahead, joining a broader trail. Safety, if she could reach it. Behind her, the sounds of combat continued. Cries, curses, the scrape of boots on stone. She didn't look back. Couldn't. Then silence. Terrible. Complete silence. Clara reached the wide trail and finally turned. The ridge stretched empty behind her. No Taza, no pursuers, nothing but wind and stone. "No!" she whispered. Then louder. "No!" Samuel began to cry. Picking up her distress, she clutched him, staring at the empty ridge, willing Taza to appear. He couldn't be gone. Not after everything. Not when they just found movement. A figure pulling himself up over the edge of the ridge where it met the trail. Taza, bloodied but alive, his shirt torn, a gash across his ribs. Clara ran to him, catching him as he stumbled. "I thought 3 fell," he gasped. "The rest lost their stomach for it, but they'll find another way. We must—" The crack of a distant rifle cut him off. Rock chips stung Clara's face. The posse had retreated, but someone had fetched a long rifle. Even across the canyon, they were targets. "The cave," Taza said, pointing to a dark opening in the cliff face. "Quick!" They dove into shelter as more shots rang out. The cave was shallow but angled, providing cover. Taza slumped against the wall, breathing hard. Blood seeped between his fingers where he pressed against his ribs. "Let me see," Clara demanded. "No time. They'll circle around. Try to flank us." He looked at her with eyes full of pain and determination. "Take the boy. Follow the cave. It cuts through to the other side. Half a day's climb to Black Elk. Tell him, I'm not leaving you. Clara, no." She set Samuel down and began tearing strips from her petticoat. "We survive together or not at all. That's what you taught me, what the mountain taught us." His hand caught hers. "Stubborn woman." "Stubborn man," she countered, binding his wounds with quick efficiency. "Now stop bleeding and help me think." Despite everything, he almost smiled. "The white men fear the dark. They won't enter the cave system, but they'll wait us out. Then we go deeper. You said it cuts through. Old Apache knowledge, but it's treacherous. Easy to get lost. Better than certain death out here." As if to emphasize her point, another shot rang out, the bullet whining through the cave mouth. Taza struggled to his feet. "Stay close. No light once we're deep. Trust the mountain." They plunged into darkness, leaving the sounds of pursuit behind. Clara's hand found Taza's, their fingers interlacing. Samuel whispered between them, but quietly, as if he understood the need for silence. Behind them, Morrison's voice echoed into the cave. "We know you're in there. We'll wait. Days if we need to. You'll come out or starve." But Clara and Taza were already gone, swallowed by the mountain's secret passages, whether toward death or salvation. They couldn't know, but they went together, and somehow, in the crushing dark with danger before and behind, that was enough. The mountain had judged their hearts and found them worthy of one more chance. Now they had only to prove the mountain right. The cave system finally released them into blinding daylight after what felt like hours of darkness. Clara stumbled out, supporting Taza's weight, both of them filthy and exhausted. Samuel clung to her neck, whimpering softly. The child had been brave beyond his years in those black passages. Before them stretched Black Elk's camp, a collection of wickiups nestled in a protected valley. But between them and safety stood a line of Apache warriors, bows drawn, faces painted for war. "Stop," one commanded in accented English. "No whites here." Taza straightened with effort, speaking rapidly in Apache. The warriors' expressions shifted from hostility to shock as they recognized him beneath the blood and dirt. Two rushed forward to support him while others kept their weapons trained on Clara. "She's with me," Taza said firmly, switching to English for her benefit. "She saved my son. She is under my protection." The lead warrior, a scarred man Clara would later learn was running bare, spat at her feet. "White woman brings death. Always. The soldiers track us." "Yes," Taza interrupted. "But she didn't lead them. They hunt her as they hunt me, for the crime of saving an Apache child." By now, the commotion had drawn others. Women and children emerged from lodges. Elders hobbled forward, and through them all came a figure of unmistakable authority, Black Elk himself, his weathered face unreadable as stone. He studied Clara for a long moment, then spoke to Taza in Apache. The conversation grew heated, with gestures toward her, toward Samuel, toward the mountains where pursuit might follow. Other voices joined in, some angry, some curious, all passionate. "Finally!" Black Elk raised his hand for silence. He approached Clara, circling her slowly like she was a horse at market. She stood straight, meeting his eyes when he finally faced her, refusing to show fear though her heart hammered against her ribs. "You save Apache child," he said in careful English. "Why?" "Because he was a child." Clara replied simply, "Alone, dying, what else could I do? Let him die. White women do this. Then perhaps I'm not like other white women." Something that might have been approval flickered in the old chief's eyes. He turned to address the camp, his voice carrying the weight of decision. Clara couldn't understand the words, but she saw their effect. Some nodded acceptance. Others turned away in disgust. Running Bear looked like he'd swallowed something bitter. "You stay," Black Elk announced. "But watched, guarded. You make trouble, you die. Understand?" "I understand." They were given a small wickiup at the camp's edge, close enough for protection, far enough to mark their uncertain status. Taza collapsed on the buffalo hide bedding as soon as they entered, his wounds and exhaustion finally overwhelming his warrior's will. Clara tended him through the fever that followed, using skills learned from her mother and herbs grudgingly provided by the camp's medicine woman, Singing Crow. The old woman spoke no English, but her gestures made clear she thought Clara a necessary evil at best. For 3 days. Clara rarely left the wickiup. She cared for Taza, played with Samuel, and endured the stares and whispers whenever she ventured out for water or necessities. Some women watched her with open curiosity, others with undisguised hatred. The children were boldest, creeping close to stare at her pale skin and light hair before darting away, giggling. On the 4th morning, Taza's fever broke. He woke clear-eyed to find Clara dozing beside him, Samuel tucked between them. His hand touched her face gently, and she startled awake. "You stayed," he murmured. "Where else would I go?" She checked his bandages, relieved to see healthy healing. "Your people don't exactly welcome me with open arms." "Give them time. They've lost too much to trust easily." He caught her hand. "But they'll see what I see, what Samuel sees. You belong here." A commotion outside interrupted them. Angry voices. Running feet. Taza struggled to rise, but Clara pressed him back. "Rest. I'll see what—" The wickiup flap burst open. Running Bear stood there, war paint fresh on his face, a rifle in his hands. Behind him, Clara glimpsed other warriors similarly armed. "Soldiers," he spat. 3 miles, coming fast. The white woman led them here." "I led no one," Clara protested, but Running Bear backhanded her casually, sending her sprawling. Taza erupted from the bedding despite his wounds, knife appearing in his hand. "Touch her again and die!" The 2 warriors faced each other, violence crackling between them. Then Black Elk's voice cut through the tension like a blade. "Enough!" The chief entered, his presence filling the small space. "We fight soldiers, not each other." His eyes found Clara. "You come, now!" She was dragged to the camp's center where the entire band had gathered, perhaps 60 souls all told. From infants to ancients, Black Elk stood before them, and beside him, Clara's heart sank. A white man's coat, blue with cavalry insignia, freshly taken from its owner. Blood still stained the brass buttons. "Scout," Black Elk said. "Found this morning. He talked before he die. Say soldiers come for white woman who steal Apache child. Say they pay gold for her return." He fixed Clara with his penetrating gaze. "What say you?" Clara lifted her chin. "I stole no child. I saved him. From starvation, from death." She looked around the circle of faces. Would any mother here have done different? Would any father? Her eyes found Taza, who had dragged himself from the wickiup. "Your war chief asked me to come, to tend his son. I came willingly. I stay willingly. If that brings danger to you, then I'll face the soldiers, but not as their friend, as your enemy." Murmurs rippled through the crowd. Then a young woman stepped forward. Little Dove, whose own child had died of white man's fever the previous winter. "I watch her," Little Dove said in halting English. "She tend Taza with good heart. Teach boy white words, but also Apache ways. She no spy. She mother." Others began to speak, some for, some against. The debate raged in Apache, but Clara could read the body language, see the tide slowly turning, when Singing Crow herself stepped forward and spoke at length, gesturing at Clara with something less than hostility. Clara knew the worst had passed. Finally, Black Elk raised his hand. "The white woman stays. She has drawn soldiers to us. Yes, but soldiers always come. Today, tomorrow, no difference. We fight. But first," he smiled grimly, "first, we make her Apache." Before Clara could process this, Women surrounded her. Her dress, already tattered from their journey, was stripped away, replaced with soft buckskin. Her hair was rebraided in Apache fashion, adorned with beads and feathers. They painted her face with symbols she didn't understand, but that made Samuel laugh and reach for her. When they finished, Little Dove held up a piece of polished metal so Clara could see herself. A stranger looked back, neither fully white nor fully Apache, but something new, something that might, possibly, belong. Taza had managed to stand, supported by another warrior. The pride in his eyes as he looked at her made Clara's breath catch. "Beautiful," he said simply, "and fierce, a true Apache woman." War cries erupted around them. The soldiers were close now, dust clouds visible on the horizon. Warriors rushed to defensive positions while women and children prepared to flee deeper into the mountains if needed. But Black Elk had one more surprise. He approached Clara with a knife, not threateningly, but ceremonially. "You say you stand with us against soldiers? Prove it!" He handed her the blade, then gestured to where prisoners sat bound, 3 men from Morrison's posse, captured while scouting ahead. Clara recognized one, Jacob Mills, the blacksmith who'd helped drive her from Dust Hollow. "Apache justice," Black Elk said. "They come to steal you back. You show them where you belong now." Clara hefted the knife, walking slowly to where Mills knelt. His eyes widened with recognition, then narrowed with hate. "Savage whore!" he spat. "Traitor to your race! They'll hang you for—" Clara moved fast, the blade flashing. Mills' words cut off in a gurgle as his throat opened in a red smile. But it wasn't his throat she'd cut, just the ropes binding him. "Run," she told him coldly. "Tell Morrison. Tell them all. Clara Whitmore is dead. In her place stands—" She glanced at Taza, who nodded encouragement. "In her place stands woman who saves, mother of Apache children, protected by Apache law. Tell them any who come for her will feed the vultures." Mills scrambled to his feet and ran, stumbling in his haste. Clara cut the other 2 free as well, sending them after their companion with similar messages. The camp erupted in approval. War cries, ululations, weapons thrust skyward. Even Running Bear nodded grudging respect. Black Elk placed his hand on Clara's shoulder. "Smart. Let fear run ahead of bullets. But soldiers still come." "Then we fight," Clara said, surprised by her own calm. "Together?" as the warriors prepared for battle. Taza pulled Clara aside. "That was dangerous. Mills might have—" "But he didn't." She touched his face gently. "I'm tired of running. Taza, tired of being hunted. If this is to be my home, our home, then I'll defend it." He kissed her fiercely, there in front of everyone, claiming her before his people as she had claimed her place among them. When the soldiers came, they found not a helpless band of savages, but a united people defending their own. And among the defenders, a woman with sun-colored hair and Apache war paint, fighting for the family she'd chosen over the one that had cast her out. The battle would be fierce. Some would fall. But in that moment, as war cries echoed off canyon walls and the free people made their stand, Clara knew she was exactly where she belonged. 5 years had passed since the battle at Black Elk's camp. 5 years since Clara Whitmore ceased to exist and Woman Who Saves took her place. The small settlement nestled in the southern valley bore little resemblance to either Apache rancherias or white towns. It was something entirely new, born from necessity and nurtured by hope. Clara stood in the doorway of their adobe home, watching the sunrise paint the desert in shades of gold and crimson. Children's laughter drifted from the schoolhouse, a mix of Apache, Mexican, and even a few white children whose parents had found refuge here. Samuel, now 7 and strong despite his early trials, led a pack of youngsters in some game that seemed to involve equal parts running and shrieking. "You're up early?" Taza's voice came from behind her, his arms encircling her waist. She leaned back into his warmth, savoring the quiet moment. "Sarah Wyndham arrives today," Clara reminded him. "The woman from Fort Yuma carrying a half-Apache child." Taza's arms tightened slightly. They'd been receiving more such refugees lately, women cast out for loving across racial lines. Mixed families with nowhere else to turn. Former soldiers who'd married Apache women and couldn't return to their old lives. Running Bear won't like it, Taza observed. Running Bear doesn't like anything that challenges his world, Clara replied. But even he can't argue with Black Elk's vision. The old chief had surprised everyone 3 years ago when he'd declared this valley neutral ground, a place where the old hatreds could be set aside, where children could grow up knowing both worlds. It hadn't been easy. They'd faced raids from both sides, those who saw their mixed community as an abomination. But they'd survived. More than survived. They'd begun to thrive. "Papa, Mama!" Samuel ran up, his face flushed with play. Behind him tagged Maria, the daughter of a Mexican trader and an Apache woman, and young Thomas, whose white father and Apache mother had been among their first refugees. "Can we go to the river today?" Samuel asked in the fluid mix of English and Apache that had become their settlement's unique tongue. "Thomas says the fish are jumping." "After chores," Taza said firmly, ruffling his son's hair. "The goats need tending." Samuel groaned but ran off with his friends, their cultural differences invisible in the democracy of childhood. "He's growing so fast," Clara murmured, "as is our family." Taza replied, his hand moving to rest on her still flat belly. "Only last week." Singing Crow had confirmed what Clara suspected. New life grew within her, a child conceived in love and hope rather than fear and flight. The sound of horses drew their attention. A small party approached from the north. Clara recognized Little Dove's husband, Spotted Eagle, escorting a wagon. As it drew closer, she could see the woman huddled in the back, clutching a bundle to her chest, her face bearing the hollow look of one who'd lost everything. Clara walked out to meet them, Taza beside her. The woman, Sarah Wyndham, barely 20, looked up with eyes that expected judgment and found only welcome. "Mrs. Whitmore," Sarah whispered. They said you'd understand. It's just Clara now," she replied gently, helping the younger woman down. "And yes, I understand. Come, you're safe here." As Clara led Sarah to the guest lodge, she remembered her own arrival in Apache lands, terrified, desperate, clinging to Samuel as her only anchor. Now she was the one offering sanctuary, the one extending hope to the hopeless. The settlement had grown organically around that principle. What started as a refuge had become a community. They had their own wells now, their own fields where Apache women and white refugees worked side by side. Taza had taught the men, Apache and white alike, to hunt together, to defend together. Clara ran the school, teaching children to read and write in both English and Spanish, while Singing Crow ensured they also learned the old Apache ways. It wasn't paradise. Tensions still flared. Some Apache warriors resented the white presence, while some white refugees struggled to shed their ingrained prejudices. But when threatened from outside, they stood together. The shared danger had forged them into something new. That evening, the community gathered for their weekly council. Black Elk, though he lived primarily with the main band, often visited to guide their experiment. He sat now at the council fire, his weathered face reflecting both pride and concern. "Soldiers mass at Fort Grant," he reported. "New commander says he will clean out all renegade settlements." "Let them come," Running Bear growled. He'd become one of their fiercest defenders, though he'd never admit to respecting Clara. "We've beaten them before. Not like this," Black Elk warned. 200 men, artillery. They mean to make example. The council erupted in debate. Fight or flee. Stand or scatter. Clara listened to the arguments in multiple languages, her heart heavy. They'd built something precious here, something that proved different peoples could live together in peace. Must it always end in blood? "I'll go to them," she said suddenly, her voice cutting through the noise. "The new commander doesn't know the history. Maybe I can make him understand." "No." Taza's response was immediate and fierce. You carry our child. I won't risk." "Then I'll go," a new voice interrupted. Sarah Wyndham stood at the edge of the firelight, her baby in her arms, steel in her spine. "I'm fresh from their world. I know how they think, how to speak their language of law and propriety. Let me try. Others volunteered. A former sergeant who'd married an Apache woman. A Mexican trader who'd made this his home. Even Running Bear's own son, who'd learned English at Clara's school. In the end, a delegation of 6 was chosen, 3 from each world, to show their unity. They left at dawn, carrying a white flag and a letter Clara had written explaining their community, their peaceful intentions, their desire only to live free. The settlement waited in tense silence for their return. 3 days later, the delegation rode back with unexpected news. The commander, Colonel William Hartley, ironically, a distant cousin of the doctor who'd helped drive Clara from Dust Hollow, had agreed to meet with their leaders. Not at the fort, but on neutral ground. He's curious, the former sergeant reported. Says he's heard stories about a place where Apache and whites live together. Wants to see if it's true or just frontier legend. The meeting was arranged for the following week. Clara spent the time preparing, organizing the children to sing songs in both languages, having the women prepare foods from multiple traditions, ensuring the settlement showed its best face. But she also helped Taza and the warriors prepare defenses, knowing this could still be a trap. Colonel Hartley arrived with a small escort, his uniform immaculate despite the desert heat. Clara watched from the schoolhouse as Taza and Black Elk greeted him, saw the colonel's eyes widen as he took in their community. White women grinding corn alongside Apache mothers, mixed children playing freely, men of different races working together on construction. Then his gaze found her, and recognition dawned. "My God," he breathed. "Clara Whitmore. They said you were dead." "Clara Whitmore is dead," she replied calmly. Stepping forward, "I'm woman who saves now. Teacher, healer, mother." She placed a hand on her belly. Wife to a good man, builder of something new. The colonel studied her, the Apache dress, the sun-darkened skin, the quiet authority she now carried. Then he looked around again at the settlement, at the school where children learned together, at the fields where former enemies worked side by side. "This shouldn't be possible," he said finally. "Many things shouldn't be possible." Clara replied, "But here we are. We threaten no one. Colonel, we ask only to be left in peace, to raise our children without hatred, to prove that another way exists." The tour that followed showed Hartley everything, their governance structure that blended Apache tradition with frontier democracy, their sharing of resources and knowledge, their commitment to defending each other regardless of origin. By evening, when they all sat down to a meal featuring Apache fry bread, Mexican beans, and American cornbread, the colonel seemed thoughtful rather than hostile. "Washington won't like this," he said finally. "An unsanctioned settlement, mixed marriages, unclear loyalties. Our loyalty is to each other," Taza said firmly. "To peace, to our children's future." Hartley was quiet for a long moment. Then, "I'll need regular reports. Assurance that you're not harboring hostiles or planning raids. Any violence from this settlement, and I'll have no choice but to act." "Agreed," Black Elk said solemnly. As the colonel prepared to leave, he pulled Clara aside. "Your family in Missouri thinks you're dead. Should I let them mourn who they think I was?" Clara said softly, "That woman truly is gone." Hartley nodded, then surprised her by extending his hand. "Build something good here, Mrs. Woman Who Saves. God knows we need examples of peace in this territory." After the soldiers left, the settlement erupted in celebration. They'd won recognition, or at least tolerance. Their experiment could continue. That night, as Clara lay in Taza's arms with Samuel curled beside them, she thought about the journey that had brought them here. From condemned woman to respected leader, from mutual suspicion to deep love. From 3 desperate souls to a growing community that defied every expectation. "No regrets?" Taza asked, echoing his question from years before. Clara laughed softly, her hand covering his where it rested on their unborn child. "How could I regret the path that brought me home?" Outside, the desert wind sang through the canyon, and somewhere a coyote called to its pack. But here in their adobe home, In their impossible settlement, 3 souls who'd found each other against all odds rested in peace. They'd changed nothing and everything. The world still turned on its axis of hatred and division. But in one small valley, another way flourished. Love had built something stronger than walls, more enduring than prejudice. And tomorrow, when the sun rose over their mixed fields and multicultural school, it would shine on proof that enemies could become family, that the condemned could become the celebrated, that love, stubborn, foolish, magnificent love, could indeed conquer all. Thank you for joining us around the Wild West Campfire for this tale of love conquering the deepest divides. Where are you listening to this story from? Drop a comment and let us know. We love connecting with listeners from around the world. If Clara and Taza's journey touched your heart, please subscribe to Wild West Campfire and share your thoughts below. Until next time, partners, keep riding toward the sunset and believing in the power of love to change the world.